Betrayal Hub. Subscribe. Subscribe for grounded stories about everyday choices that quietly change everything. She called it a break the way people talk about weather, like it was something temporary that would pass if everyone just waited it out. We were standing in the kitchen, evening light cutting across the counter, her phone buzzing once and then going silent again. She didn't pick it up. She didn't have to. She said it was healthy. Space. Perspective. Time to miss each other. She said it calmly, almost professionally, like she was outlining a pitch. She expected resistance. Questions. Maybe a small collapse she could later describe to her friends as proof that the decision had been necessary. I didn't give her any of that. I smiled. Not the kind that asks for reassurance, but the kind that closes a conversation. That was the moment her plan quietly failed, even if she didn't notice yet. My work had trained me for moments like this. I made my living keeping systems stable while everything else tried to break them. When something critical failed, you didn't panic or announce it to the room. You isolated it, rerouted traffic, and kept the rest running like nothing had happened. That night, I did exactly that. She went on talking. About deadlines. About a project that was taking over her life. About a product manager named Ryan who understood her creative pressure because he lived in it too. She didn't say his name with guilt. She said it with energy. I watched her move around the kitchen, already half gone, already syncing her life to another rhythm. Her phone buzzed again, longer this time. She flipped it face down and smiled like she was being considerate. I didn't ask for her schedule. I didn't ask what the break meant. I said I understood. I told her to do what she needed. The relief on her face was immediate, almost visible, like she'd just avoided a difficult meeting. That night, while she slept, I didn't scroll through her messages or look for proof. I did something quieter. I opened my calendar and started shifting things. Meetings moved earlier. Gym sessions slid into hours she was never home. Dinners disappeared. By morning, nothing looked different. We still shared the same space, the same address, the same polite routine, but the first connection had already been rerouted. She thought the break was about distance. She didn't realize it was about timing. And she had no idea that, from that moment on, we were no longer living in the same day. The first sign didn't come from her phone. It came from her confidence. She stopped explaining herself. She stopped checking whether I was listening. She moved through the apartment like someone who had already secured another place to land. Mornings changed first. She used to linger, coffee cooling in her hands while she talked about ideas that hadn't fully formed yet. Now she left early, dressed sharper, already half engaged in a day that didn't include me. By the time I came back from the gym, the apartment felt staged, like a hotel room reset by housekeeping. Her work followed her home in a new way. Slack notifications pulsed across her screen when she thought I wasn't looking. The name Ryan surfaced often enough to stop being invisible. She said he was intense, driven, exhausting in a way she admired. She said the project was fragile and needed constant attention. She said a lot of things without being asked. I didn't interrupt. I didn't challenge the narrative. I watched the pattern instead. Messages that arrived late. Calls taken in the other room with the door half closed. Laughter that cut off the moment I entered. None of it was dramatic. That was the part that mattered. One afternoon, I ran into her colleague Maya near our building. Maya hesitated when she saw me, the way people do when they know something but haven't decided whether to carry it alone. She asked how I was handling everything. She didn't clarify. She didn't need to. The look on her face did the rest. I told her things were stable. That word again. It ended the conversation cleanly. That evening, my wife came home energized, talking fast, pacing while she spoke. She mentioned Ryan again, this time casually, like a recurring character everyone had agreed belonged in the story now. She said the team was thinking about an offsite. Long hours. Maybe a weekend. She watched my face when she said it. I gave her nothing. I nodded once. I asked if she wanted dinner. She looked almost disappointed. That night, while she slept with her phone face down on the nightstand, it lit up twice. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. I already knew where the traffic was flowing. Instead, I finalized a new on-call rotation at work that pushed my availability into early mornings and late nights. I volunteered for infrastructure maintenance windows no one wanted. I adjusted my life with the same precision I used to reroute data around a failing node. She thought the break was creating space for something new. She didn't realize she was slowly being removed from the system she used to be central to. The proof didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated quietly, like logs filling a server no one was monitoring anymore. Small things at first. A shared calendar entry marked private that used to be blank. Expense notifications that didn't line up with client dinners she had mentioned. Ride receipts that ended nowhere near her office. She started locking her screen automatically. Not dramatically, just a new habit. Muscle memory adapting to a different audience. One evening, she left her laptop open on the dining table while she showered. A work messenger window sat minimized but not closed, the icon pulsing once before going still. I didn't open it. I didn't touch anything. I stood there long enough to read the subject line of a pinned thread reflected faintly in the dark screen. Her name, Ryan's. A shared joke title that didn't belong to a professional workspace. When she came back, wrapped in a towel, she closed the laptop with a quick, practiced motion and started talking about timelines and deliverables. Her voice carried excitement, not secrecy. That was the difference. She wasn't hiding. She was already elsewhere. The next day, a payment alert crossed my phone. A hotel charge from a place near the startup's office. Midweek. No conferences scheduled. No team events announced. The amount was too specific to be accidental. I didn't confront her. I didn't save screenshots or forward anything to myself. I did what I always did when something critical showed signs of cascading failure. I documented it mentally and moved on to mitigation. I shifted my workload again. Took ownership of a migration project that required late-night monitoring. I moved my personal appointments to hours she was guaranteed to be busy. I stopped syncing my availability with hers entirely. At home, I became efficient, polite, present only in the most technical sense. I refilled supplies, paid bills early, handled everything quietly, like a system that never asks for credit. She noticed the smoothness before she noticed the absence. She commented on how easy things felt lately, how little friction there was between us. She said the break was working. That night, she dressed carefully before leaving, checking her reflection twice. She said she had a late session with the team. She didn't ask if I minded. After the door closed, I sat in the quiet apartment and updated my access credentials, separating accounts, isolating dependencies. Not as a statement, as a precaution. She believed the evidence lived in messages and receipts. She didn't understand that the real proof was behavioral. And by the time she realized I was no longer reacting, it would already be too late to change the outcome. The disappearance didn't look like an exit. That was the part she missed. I didn't pack a bag or announce a trip. I didn't sleep on the couch or stop coming home. I simply stopped arriving when she expected me to be there. I started waking up earlier, leaving before the apartment fully came alive. By the time she reached for her phone in the morning, I was already deep into work calls, headphones on, unavailable without ever saying the word. At night, when she returned charged and restless, I was already winding down somewhere else. Not out, just elsewhere in the day. We still crossed paths, but only briefly. Hallway moments, neutral exchanges. She began to tell stories faster, compressing hours of experience into minutes, trying to keep me current. I nodded. I listened. I didn't anchor anything. She suggested we reschedule a dinner we'd planned weeks earlier. I said my calendar was tight. That was new. I had always made room. Now I didn't move anything. She started eating alone more often, scrolling through her phone between bites, smiling at messages I no longer tried to interpret. She didn't hide them. She assumed I wasn't paying attention anymore. I shifted my weekends into workdays and my weekdays into personal time. I booked classes, appointments, meetings that filled the spaces she used to occupy by default. Nothing dramatic, just consistent. After a while, she stopped asking where I was going. She started asking when I'd be back. I gave general answers. Later. Early. Not sure yet. Each one true enough to end the question. One evening, she waited up for me. I came in quietly, keys placed where they always were. She looked at me from the couch, confused in a way she hadn't been before. She said it felt like we were missing each other on purpose. I didn't correct her. A few days later, she tried to pull us back into sync. She suggested a shared calendar again. A reset. A way to feel connected. I said we could talk about it another time. I never scheduled that conversation. The apartment started to feel different. Not colder, just less coordinated. Two people moving through the same space without intersecting. Like parallel processes no longer sharing memory. She had asked for a break to see what life felt like without pressure. What she got was something else entirely. A version of me that was still present, still calm, but no longer waiting. By the time she realized we weren't drifting, that this wasn't temporary, she was already living alone in a relationship that technically still existed. Ryan entered my life without ever meeting me. His presence showed up in patterns, not faces. In the way her energy spiked before certain meetings. In how she rehearsed explanations that were never asked for. In the sudden confidence with which she talked about the future of a project that wasn't even live yet. He thought the break was permission. He acted like it too. Longer meetings. Looser boundaries. She started coming home later, talking about momentum and alignment. About how rare it was to find someone who moved at her speed. She said his name like it belonged in the room. I never said it didn't. At work, I had access to more than infrastructure. I saw how startups moved behind the curtain. How fragile confidence could be when it wasn't backed by structure. Ryan's company came up during a routine vendor review. Nothing unusual, just a familiar logo in a list of names. I listened more closely after that. I asked neutral questions in meetings that had nothing to do with him. I paid attention to timelines, dependencies, pressure points. I didn't chase information. I let it surface naturally. One evening, she mentioned Ryan was stressed, that investors were getting impatient, that a release had been rushed. She framed it as concern. I heard opportunity. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't warn anyone. I simply shared accurate information with the right people at the right time, the same way I always did. No names emphasized. No drama attached. Just clarity where there had been assumption. Things started shifting for her before she noticed. Meetings canceled. Tone changes. A delay she hadn't planned for. She started checking her phone more often, her excitement replaced by tight focus. Ryan's confidence dulled. Not all at once. Enough to be felt. She came home one night distracted, unusually quiet. She said the project was hitting unexpected resistance. She said Ryan was suddenly hard to read. She said it felt like things were slipping. I listened. I didn't comfort her. I didn't step in. What she didn't understand was that nothing had been attacked. No sabotage. No revenge. Just the removal of assumptions he relied on. Without them, he was just another man under pressure, making mistakes where no one had been watching closely before. She thought her outside world was expanding. She didn't realize one of its pillars had started to crumble quietly. And while she focused on stabilizing him, she failed to notice that I was no longer positioned anywhere near the center of her concern. The shift became visible to other people before it became undeniable to her. That was the moment everything changed. Not because anyone exposed her, but because the room stopped adjusting itself around her version of events. It started at a small dinner she insisted we attend together. Colleagues, a few friends, familiar faces she was used to controlling. I arrived later than expected, calm, already disengaged. She tried to pull me into conversations, referencing shared stories that no longer felt current. The timing was off. The rhythm didn't match. Someone asked how we were doing. Not directly, casually. The kind of question people ask when they already sense movement under the surface. She answered quickly, confidently, saying we were taking space to grow individually. She smiled when she said it, waiting for approval. It didn't come. The reactions were polite but distant. Short acknowledgments. Redirected conversations. A subtle withdrawal she wasn't used to navigating. One of her friends mentioned how hard it must be to balance so much at once, then changed the subject without waiting for her response. I didn't add anything. I didn't need to. As the evening went on, she grew sharper, louder, overcompensating. She laughed a little too long. She checked her phone too often. Ryan's name didn't come up, but his absence hovered around her like static. On the way home, she was quiet. Not reflective. Disoriented. She said it felt like people were judging her. She said she didn't understand why no one was supportive. I listened. I didn't validate the confusion. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated. Fewer invitations. Shorter conversations. A delay in responses from people who used to reply immediately. She started asking if something was wrong. I said I hadn't noticed anything unusual. At work, her position softened. Not demoted, just less central. Decisions moved without her. Information reached her later than it used to. She blamed the project's stress. She blamed Ryan's instability. She didn't consider herself. The social ground beneath her hadn't collapsed. It had receded. Quietly. Deliberately. No confrontation. No spectacle. She was being left out of rooms she used to command, and she couldn't point to a single moment where it had gone wrong. By the time she realized she was standing alone in conversations that used to orbit her, she finally looked at me differently. Not as someone she was distancing from, but as someone who was no longer standing where she left him. Her isolation didn't arrive as loneliness at first. It showed up as noise. More calls. More pacing. More restless movement through the apartment, like she was searching for a signal that had dropped without warning. She started coming home earlier again, testing for overlap. I was rarely there. When I was already in motion, heading out or finishing something that couldn't be paused. Our exchanges stayed functional. Calm. Short. She began lingering in doorways, watching me like she was trying to remember how access used to work. Ryan stopped being a source of momentum. His messages, when she mentioned them at all, sounded heavier. Complicated. She framed it as pressure, but the excitement was gone. She no longer disappeared into calls with the same ease. Sometimes she stayed in the room, phone in hand, scrolling without typing. One evening, she sat across from me while I worked, silent longer than usual. She said it felt strange how little we talked now. She said the break was starting to feel bigger than she expected. I didn't correct her language. I didn't reassure her. She tried to anchor herself socially. Coffee plans. Last-minute invitations. Group chats that used to light up now responded slowly or not at all. She refreshed screens like they might change their minds if she waited long enough. At home, she began mirroring my schedule, waking earlier, staying up later, trying to collide with me again. The timing never worked. When she slowed down, I was already ahead. When she sped up, I was winding down. She stood in the kitchen one morning, watching me prepare to leave, and asked when things had gotten so distant. The question landed late, like a message sent after the system had already failed over. I didn't answer it directly. I told her I had a full day. That was when she started to understand something fundamental had shifted. Not emotionally. Structurally. The role she used to occupy in my life had been deprecated without announcement. The system was still running, but it no longer depended on her input. Ryan's situation worsened. She stopped mentioning him entirely, which told me more than any update would have. Whatever certainty she thought she'd secured outside the marriage was no longer stable enough to lean on. She moved through the apartment carefully now, like she was afraid of breaking something that was already gone. She watched me with a new attention, not desire, not anger, but concern. I was still there, still calm, still consistent. That was what unsettled her the most. She had expected distance to create fear. What it created instead was silence she couldn't reach into, and a version of me that no longer adjusted to make her feel safe. The confrontation didn't start with raised voices or accusations. It started with her waiting for me, really waiting this time. Sitting still, phone untouched, the apartment quiet in a way it hadn't been for weeks. I came in and immediately felt it. The tension wasn't sharp. It was heavy, settled, like something that had been sitting there all day. She asked if we could talk. Not urgently, carefully, as if sudden movement might make me disappear again. We sat across from each other. No props. No distractions. She said the break wasn't supposed to feel like this. She said she thought space would bring clarity, not distance that couldn't be crossed. She said she felt like she'd lost access to me without being told when or how it happened. I listened without interrupting. I didn't mirror her concern. I didn't lean in. She asked if I was angry. She asked if I was punishing her. She asked if there was someone else. I answered none of those directly. I told her I'd been busy. I told her my schedule had changed. I told her I was focused. That unsettled her more than any accusation would have. She tried again, softer this time. She said she missed how we used to move together, how we used to debrief at the end of the day. She said she felt like she was chasing a version of me that no longer existed. I didn't correct her. I didn't explain the process. She reached for specifics. Asked when we'd stopped syncing calendars. When we'd stopped eating together. When I'd stopped asking questions. Each one framed as confusion, not blame. I told her I hadn't stopped her from doing anything. I told her she'd asked for space, and I'd respected it. The silence after that stretched longer than she expected. She shifted in her seat. Her confidence flickered. She said this wasn't what she meant. She said she didn't think I'd actually let go. That was the closest she came to the truth. She waited for reassurance, for a signal that this was the part where I explained myself, where I made it safe again. I didn't. I stood up first. Not abruptly, just finished. I said I had an early morning. As I walked away, I felt her watching me with something close to panic. Not because I was leaving the room, but because she finally understood I'd already left the role she was talking to. The confrontation ended without resolution, without agreement, without drama. And that was exactly when she realized she was no longer negotiating a pause. She was facing an ending that didn't need her consent. The collapse didn't happen in a single moment. It arrived in fragments, spaced just far enough apart to keep her functional while stripping away what she relied on. She lost momentum first, the kind that let her walk into rooms assuming they would rearrange themselves for her. Ryan faded without a scene. No dramatic ending, no final declaration. Just shorter replies, missed calls, a gradual retreat framed as stress and priorities. She didn't talk about him anymore. She didn't need to. His absence followed her through the apartment like a draft. Work stopped offering her relief. The project stalled. Decisions she used to influence moved forward without her input. She stayed later, trying to reclaim ground that no longer held. When she came home, the energy she once brought with her was gone. Friends became unavailable in ways that were hard to challenge. Plans slipped. Messages went unanswered until it was too late to respond naturally. When she did see people, conversations stayed shallow, polite, non-committal. She noticed, even if she pretended not to. At home, she tried to rebuild something from routine. Cooking meals I wouldn't be there to eat. Leaving notes I didn't acknowledge. Adjusting her schedule again and again, hoping to catch me in a moment that no longer existed. I was already living differently. Not dramatically, just elsewhere. My days had shape without her in them. My evenings closed cleanly. My sleep was uninterrupted. One night, I came home to find her sitting on the floor of the living room, back against the couch, lights off. She didn't look up right away. When she did, her expression wasn't angry or pleading. It was empty. She said she didn't recognize her life anymore. She said everything felt temporary. She said she thought she'd been building something new, but now it was all gone at once. I listened. I didn't step closer. She mentioned memories then, small ones, things she'd ignored before. How I used to steady her when deadlines collapsed. How I'd handled logistics so she could stay creative. How I'd always been there, quietly absorbing the weight she never noticed herself putting down. Each memory landed like a delayed impact. Not revelation, accumulation. She realized, too late, that the stability she'd taken for granted wasn't a backdrop. It had been active, intentional, alive. Now it was gone. Not taken, not destroyed, withdrawn. She sat there, finally understanding that the break she'd engineered hadn't freed her. It had removed the one structure that made everything else possible. And I stood there, watching, knowing this moment wasn't about winning or loss. It was about completion. Because by the time someone sees the full cost of what they dismissed, the system has already moved on without them. The final moment didn't arrive with urgency. It came quietly, the way endings usually do when everything that needed to fall has already fallen. She tried once more to reach me. Not emotionally, structurally. She suggested therapy, a reset, a return to basics. She framed it carefully, like someone pitching a revised version of a project that had failed its first launch. I listened without interrupting. She waited for a signal, any sign that this conversation mattered more than the others. I told her I'd already adjusted my life to how things were, not how they used to be. I said it calmly, not as a declaration, as a fact. She asked if there was any chance left. Not desperation, calculation, like she was checking whether a door was fully closed or just resting against the frame. I didn't rush the answer. I looked at her the way you look at something familiar that no longer fits into your routine. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I told her I'd simply stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. She didn't cry. She nodded, slowly, like someone finally understanding instructions they'd ignored too long. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clear. I packed nothing that night. I didn't need to. Everything important had already been separated. Accounts, schedules, habits. I slept well. In the morning, I left earlier than usual. Not to avoid her, just because that was my rhythm now. The apartment looked the same. That was the strangest part. Weeks later, I heard through someone else that she was still trying to explain what happened. still telling the story as if timing had betrayed her, as if this had been an unfortunate misalignment instead of a choice she'd made repeatedly. I didn't correct it. I didn't need the record set straight. My life had stabilized in ways I hadn't planned for. Not exciting. Solid. Predictable in the right places. Open where it mattered. She called once after that. I didn't answer. Not out of anger. Out of completion. She had expected a collapse. Tears. Bargaining. Proof that she still mattered enough to disrupt my system. What she got instead was something colder and far more permanent. Continuity without her. I didn't win. I didn't lose. I simply exited a version of my life that no longer matched who I was becoming. And I never returned. Drop it in the comments. Hit subscribe. This is where we talk about what doesn't get forgiven.